the important part of part of the motivation why we're doing this is to just get some of this knowledge out there, get people to thinking about it. And even if you're not going to do it, right, you should at least know what you're up against when you're buying a house. It's a huge investment. Welcome. This is Stephen again with Service Plus Electrical, and I'm here with David once again on our Knob and Tube series. And so just a quick recap, we talked about Knob and Tube 101 in our first video. What is it? We talked about the pros and cons of the knob and tube wiring. We talked about what it's like to add on to that wiring or make adjustments to it, and why it's not really a great idea to alter that wiring, and some of those factors that come into it, and what is it like to do a partial upgrade as far as replacing certain areas of the house. So here we're to really the place where we hope that you'll end up if you have one of these houses, is considering the factor of, maybe it's time for a complete upgrade of this wiring, because this is really the most comprehensive way of fixing the problems, of course, but also in the long run, it's more cost effective as well. And so some of those things that we want to talk about, we're going to kind of brush over some of these things just to consider factors that you should keep in mind. So you have an older house that has the knob and tube wiring. Somebody has brought this to your attention in some way that's made you consider that maybe this should be addressed, maybe this should be replaced. A lot of times, you've fallen in love with this older house that has a lot of character. Maybe you decide that you would like to stay there for longer term, or you're just the type of person that likes to be a good steward of what you have. And when you sell that house, you want to have a sense of, you had a sense of responsibility there, and you're handing off a good thing to the next person. That's a factor that I think is in many ways been lost. We want to, ideally you want to sell something to someone that they're going to be very grateful for. And so these are just some of the things that might make you consider the complete upgrade. But we do want to mention that when we're getting into, say, replacing certain sections of the knob and tube wiring, it's quite a bit different to just replace the circuitry as it is with new wiring, as opposed to actually bringing the house up to code. There's so many factors that have changed. And David, you want to just briefly touch on, we're not going to explain all of these really, but just briefly touch on some of those factors that it's not really just replacing the wiring, that we're actually bringing the house up to code.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about things like, of course, grounding, which will give you your 3-prong polarized receptacles. And most of your homes are going to have polarized receptacles in them already, but polarized grounded receptacles, GFCIs, requirements like for in the bathrooms, kitchens, in your outdoor receptacles. There's a whole host of places where you need GFCI, and nowadays even AFCI, which is, well, GFCI is ground fault circuit interrupting protection, and that will help to protect you from any kind of a small electrical shock. You might not even feel it if there was something wrong. And then arc fault will help to protect you from dangerous arcing, sparking, that can happen if something goes wrong sometimes, and that should open and protect you against that kind of stuff. Let's see. Boxes, we've already mentioned boxes that we will put into the walls. So everything that we're going to do, we're going to bring up to today's code. We're going to bring you new circuit wires, remove as much of the old knob and tube as possible. And anything that's we can't get to, we can't pull it out, we will cap it off. We'll make sure that there's not going to be some mistake in the future where that's going to get re-electrified. reconnected to.
Another
Let's-
factor is the number of circuits. And so a lot of those houses with knob and tube, especially the smaller houses, there's many of them that will only have 4 to 6 circuits in the whole house. And when we update this wiring completely,
Mm,
we're not just running 4 to 6 circuits.
right.
We're running, we use so much more electricity in the kitchen in particular
Mhm.
that we're going to run several circuits. The code minimum says we have to run 2 circuits for small appliances. We usually recommend that we'll run 3, just because it's, we're going to get into some of the future considerations as well. But we want to make sure that it's not only replaced, it's actually going to serve your needs at the time. And that's really the whole point of the code. It's to serve people's needs at this time in a safe manner, in the minimum safe manner.
Yeah.
Right. What else were we going to consider there? So we're
And-
definitely running more circuits.
Yeah, and Stephen, if I could just interject, that's a beautiful thing whenever you add more circuits, because what that does, it helps to spread out your entire electrical load across more circuits. That helps to keep the heat lower, and that's going to make the lifespan of each one of those circuits a lot longer. So you're taking stress, and you're actually adding years to your electrical system anytime you can add another circuit and split up that load over more circuits.
Mm-hmm. And this is something, a factor that's one benefit of, I'll throw one sales pitch in this whole series, right? Of why you should hire us is because we do, because this is our passion of making the older homes safer. We have more of a skill of fishing walls and things that a lot of electricians don't. They'll punch holes in walls wherever they feel like it to get the wire where they need it to go. We do this all the time, and so we like to consider ourselves expert fishermen, and we can run wires in walls without damaging the walls in most cases.
Most cases.
And so those are factors to consider as well. I think we pretty much covered, what's to consider as far as the updating to a modern code compliant installation. But then there always comes into factor, everyone has a budget. And this is where we can have some really good conversations. One of the things that always gets on people's nerves is the budget aspect. It's always a frustrating thing.
Mhm.
And oftentimes you'll be given a bid with a bunch of information that means very little to you as a homeowner, and it just has a price tag. And so this is where we want to explain some of the information there. And if we have an idea of someone's budget, we can get into some more options. And so it's really not a one size fits all thing. There are different factors that can be considered. If we know a range of a budget, we can say, this is, as we mentioned, the code is the minimum, right?
Mhm.
So we can do something to code. And there's another factor that unfortunately you have to deal with in Kansas, is that the adopted code in each jurisdiction is different. So each city can
Each city
decide.
or county. Mhm.
Most counties don't even have a code adopted, and this is where it gets kind of really crazy in Kansas. But the idea is that the information is the same as far as how the electricity works, why the code is done the way it is. Different cities are on different code cycles, and you won't hear any of this most of the time. You're more or less getting a price for rewiring.
Mhm.
That's all the information you have. And so we want to get into that information a little more. So if someone gives us a budget, then we can now say, okay, these are different factors that we can, play with.
Mhm.
And some of those factors we're considering, like ease of use. So things like where do we put 3-way switches? And we're doing like convenience type, preference type things like dimmer switches, USB receptacles, those types of things. Even the minimum number of receptacles, the code says, there's a minimum spacing you can put. Well, if you don't ask any of these questions and you don't have these conversations, you're going to get the minimum from your contractor. And so we want to have conversations where we say, do you want, here's one example that people can sometimes be frustrated with the end product is they have a bedroom and you're going to get the code minimum on receptacle spacing. So you're usually going to get an outlet right in the center of that wall. And then you put your bed there and you say, well, my outlet's right behind my bed. That's frustrating. Right. And so this is where you have these conversations where maybe you need an extra outlet on that wall. So you have one on either side of the bed. Things like that are the conversations we can have. And then not only the comfort and ease of use, but also the future factors. Right, yeah. David? So that's something you mentioned in one of the other videos earlier on the series is, when they installed this knob and tube wiring, they didn't know the future of electrical use. So when you're going from today, like what are some examples where someone might overlook a factor in the future where they wish they would have done something different? One example that I use a lot is like a hot tub. My wife and I are in love with our hot tub.
Okay.
And so your house is typically not set up for that as far as the electrical service. And if someone doesn't ask you that question and you want to add one later, it can be a big factor. You don't want to upgrade your electrical service 5 years after you've rewired your house. That's a factor to consider. What are some other factors that they might consider as far as the future of their home?
Just larger service panel, I guess, load centers, maybe even adding a second one.
There's, for example, if someone wants to, if they know they want to put an addition on their house later, those are things that it can be a lot cheaper. And this is all stuff, under the umbrella that if you do more at one time and of all these future factors at one time, then this is going to be a lot cheaper in the long run. Because the electrician can prepare the job, they can run extra wires over to this other side of the house for your addition later. Different things can be done to make the whole thing more cost effective, as opposed to, oh, I realize now I want this, and I realize later I want this, and all that's fine. We can deal with it, right? But it is going to cost more money.
Yeah, and typically the more that you can plan up front and come to decisions, it's going to save a lot. As you were mentioning before, the competitive contractor is going to give you the minimum code minimums, and that's going to be his bid. And if you make any changes, that's where they can say, okay, that's going to cost all this extra, And a lot of times the changes, sometimes they come about because we run into things. We realize structurally the house can't do what we were expecting. We can't get wire somewhere. Just throwing, but a lot of these decisions could be made up front. And the more upgrades you can combine all at once, that you're going to do eventually, you can bring your costs down. Rather than deciding as you're going, even when the project is going. That can sometimes be a huge thing on a electrical contractor to have to start, okay, now we got to juggle all these things and change our plans and shift things, and that can get pretty difficult sometimes for the contractor, and sometimes they'll charge you quite a bit extra for making those changes in the process.
One simple example just to explain that a little bit is, if you're going to want something down the line later, for example, a while back we got a treadmill, Well, a treadmill should have its own circuit if it's a big enough treadmill. And so if you know that you're going to get a treadmill in 2 days, well, now the electrician can pull two cables across the attic at the same time as opposed to one. It really doesn't take a lot more time.
Mhm.
And that's something that, it's really going to save you money in the long run. And so I think we covered that pretty well. I guess the important part of part of the motivation why we're doing this is to just get some of this knowledge out there, get people to thinking about it. And even if you're not going to do it, right, you should at least know what you're up against when you're buying a house. It's a huge investment. You should know what you're up against. And oftentimes it's one of the last things that people think about. You've kind of invested in this decision. You've walked through the house, you like the neighborhood it's in, you like the character of the home, and then you get slapped with this home inspection at the end with red letters on it. And you've kind of already made your decision at that point a lot of times. And so, yeah, we're not trying to create more problems. The problems are already there. And we just want to bring awareness so people can make conscious decisions about them as opposed to dealing with the ramifications down the road.
Mhm.
Is there any more kind of like last words that you'd like to mention on this topic of, a complete upgrade or factors that maybe we didn't cover that you could think of?
No.
Good. So that means we covered it pretty well. I mean, if there's, the budget's always an issue. A lot of times we can help people with financing their project.
There you
And
go.
so breaking that down into monthly payments or even deferred payments.
Yeah.
And that's
That's good.
sometimes a situation where the safety of the danger of the situation warrants that type of thing. And so we can help with some of those things. We can have these conversations. We love to talk about this stuff, and David and I both love to talk about this stuff. And so, we're always open to helping people make the decisions as far as just understanding things a little bit better. And even if, if we go out to as a company, if Service Plus, we go out to look at a property for you, um, we might have a small fee for that, but you get a lot of information out of that. And so that's really what we want to do. And we're not really tied down to a decision that you make. We'll let you choose either way. We really want to make sure that you're armed with the right information, though, and which is the point of this. So, to wrap up this series on knob and tube wiring, which we didn't talk as much on this last video specifically on it, but I'd like to hear from you guys. If you have a house with knob and tube, have you ever looked in the attic? Have you ever looked in the basement? Have you ever had any electrical work done? Have you ever had any of this brought to your attention when you had some contractors in? Is any of this stuff new to you? Is any of this stuff familiar to you? Is there any factors that we forgot? We want to create these discussions because really it's long overdue. And this is kind of my soliloquy is, these houses, when people settled Kansas long, long ago, and they decided they wanted electricity, a lot of those houses are still here, and it's just not adequate. So, David, I really appreciate you getting on here and investing your time researching these topics. I'm excited to see where it goes with this because I think, the more we do each topic, we see that there's more aspects that we should cover. And we're doing our best to pare it down in a way that's understandable to the listener, but it is a difficult task. If you want more in depth, check out David's articles on our website. And yeah, we'll bring you more stuff. Please message us if you have questions. It doesn't have to be regarding knob and tube, any electrical questions. We'd love to field those questions and see if we can create some clarity around the answers there. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you guys on the next topic. Thanks, David.
Sure. Thank you, Stephen.